Just before I put this on, I wanted to note that the threads on here are terrific. Very finely machined. The tolerances are quite tight. This thing spun well. The thing's been shipped with some protective oil on it, which is great. So that's something else positive about this particular tool. So anyway, round nut, we ran it all the way up the piston in that way, and now what we'll do is lower it down into its base like that, and like that, and then it says to put the lower nut on, which we will do. Definitely don't want to cross thread this, so we'll just turn it backwards slightly until it grabs, and start running up. And you can hear how well that spins. Very smooth. So then we just run this up to the top. Again, difficult with one hand, but we're almost there. I guess this is the machine shop equivalent of watching paint dry. Spinning a finely threaded fixture. There we go. Next, good. The instructions talk about putting the saddle in and the set screw. This was shipped with this, so that's the working surface, and set screws all the way in, so we don't need to do that. Next activity or step is to install the bed frame and align it at equal heights with the support pins. That would seem to make sense. So this thing, another pretty heavy piece of kit, is going in here. And I think that's going to be a two-handed job, so we don't lose some fingers. We'll slide those pins in there. And why don't we make this the first height setting, and you know, as we've noted before, holes match, pins go in without an issue, and then we'll get the other side up. So there we are, level, and then you've got these, you know, locking pins. Wow. Keep it in place, assuming one can separate them. Well, if this is the most difficult part of the assembly, I'd say these guys have done a good job. Anyway, it's not meant to really hold any pressure, it's just keeping the weight of holding the weight of this thing, and we'll put the last two on the other side and on to the next job is to hang the hand pump onto the side of the frame according to the instructions. This is step 5. I'm going to need 3 nuts and bolts for that, and the last goodies in the bag happen to be 3 bolts, 3 nuts, but no bolts. So that makes me really hope that those holes are threaded. It's hard to tell with the shadow. Anyway, we're gonna find out. So as it turns out, those holes are threaded, which is great because it'll allow us to hang this on here without the mad scramble for nuts that don't exist. The other thing about this that impresses me is that, if you can see up in there, that hole is more of a slot. And what that allows is, of course, movement down here just to align that perfectly, because you need the threads to mesh with the base. This is one of those things that would be infuriating if those holes were off even a little bit. So kudos to King for either specifying, designing, or building this thing with that in mind. So we'll just tighten these up and on to the next. 14 millimeter. I suppose I should mention that these are all metric fasteners. Those with a keen eye may have noted that I was using some Imperial, which were large enough to accommodate some of the big bolts, but really this thing is put together with metric fasteners. All right, snugging that up, and there we go. Now that fits well. What I do notice up here is very slight imperfection. That thing doesn't sit flat. I don't think I've cross-threaded it, so I am just going to check and make sure. Nope, not cross-threaded. So the base of the pump is not quite square. Again, pretty minor. I mean, it kind of sucks that it's on the front, because I'll be looking at that every time, because I have that kind of OCD deal going on. But anyway, in terms of structural issues or performance issues, as my wife's grandfather used to say, don't hurt the running of it none. So we'll hope that that's true. Anyway, another very small manufacturing issue in what's turning out to be otherwise a pretty good quality unit, at least from an assembly point of view. So we're certainly getting down to the finish line here. The final couple of steps call for the connection of the hydraulic hose to the pump inlet and installing the gauge to the top of the meter way up there, or top of the cylinder. This is an interesting gauge. It's got oil in it, which I'm assuming is a dampening, there for dampening properties, and possibly also because this thing registers up to, God, 18 tons. That's a lot of pressure going into that little unit. So I hope it's robust. This thing is 10-ton capacity, of course. So let's connect those two things. It does not make any mention of thread sealant, and you can see it's been used here. Maybe it's already pre-wrapped. I don't know. When we take it off, we'll see. So no Teflon thread wrap included or specified. So I think what we're going to do to try to start is probably just use the collar as it is, tighten it up. It looks like it's a hand, you know, it's knurled for hand tight only, I would assume. So we'll tighten that up and get the meter on top. So this fitting just tightens up. Suppose I could do it that way too. Anyway, we'll get a wrench on there to give it a final twist. Again, no Teflon thread used in other areas on this thing, but not here and not there. So we'll give it a try, and you know, if it starts to leak under pressure, we'll address that when we see that it's not holding. Right. So gauge attached and tightened, and I just reattached that because I realized I needed to run it down behind the unit So on to the last, which is, I'm going to guess, attaching the handle. Connect hydraulic hose. Oh, install grid guard and sliding brackets. Ah, other good point. So some of these things do not come with this, which is the grid guard, which is a hell of a good idea, because if you're applying a couple of tons of force to something and it shoots out towards you, before it goes through your skull, it will hit this. I believe the Princess Auto unit, you have to buy this separately for about 40 bucks. The Canadian Tire one, I think, came with it. So anyway, great idea for all but the most minimal of jobs. And that's what it looks like with the grill guard on. These things just bolt to the frame. So in terms of a very minor assembly, sort of I don't know what you call it, complaint. This screen isn't entirely flat, not a big deal. There are a couple of sharp edges that can be bent over and filed down. Again, it's not really integral to the functioning of the guard, assuming it doesn't come apart. One thing to notice, or to note, is you want the guard with the mesh on the back of these gussets. Presumably anything hitting this with force is going to be trapped by this. If you put this the other way around, there's nothing but some tack welds, and if something hit this with a lot of kinetic energy, it might pop the screen right out and carry on into your face. Now, one should be wearing approved safety glasses. Even a face shield would be ideal. But just one little note to keep in mind, and I do believe the instructions, no, it's hard to see there. The instructions do not show those little corner gussets. So again, sort of a minor issue. The other thing is, before I found this didn't slide up and down terribly easily in these tracks, because I had kind of reefed these down, which had, not misaligned them slightly, but just made it harder for them to adapt to this movement. So put them in loosely, put the frame in, and then tighten it up, and shouldn't be any issue with it sliding up and down. So I guess the last thing to do is just put the pump handle in here. The instructions don't make any reference to it, but I would accept the argument that if you don't know where that thing goes, you probably shouldn't be playing with one of these things in the first place, right? So this is pretty much the last assembly element. There we go. So it's done. It does say before using it for the first time you need to purge the air from the cylinder, and the way one does that is by opening this and giving a few pumps. See if that does it. And you tighten it up. Actually, the last thing to do here is to put the bed frame plates on. Now they're not locked in any way. They sit under the piece and the piston, and then would presumably get held in place just by pressure. So don't forget those things aren't locked in. They are both more than heavy enough to do some damage to your toes, so maybe store them somewhere else when they're not being used. So we have bled the air and removed the sticker that reminds one not to put their hand between the piston and whatever they're working on. That seems like good advice. let's give it a couple of pumps and see what happens. There we go. Piston is going down. We are not seeing any pressure because when this meter measures in tons, the first notch I think is something like, oh god, what's a quarter of 5 tons? Anyway, it'll be a while before that dial starts to move. So anyway, it is working. And then the operating instructions say to get the piston to go back up, you turn this, and there we go. And presumably that'll get a little smoother as the whole system self-lubricates. So there we go. From top to bottom, there's the King Canada 10-ton hydraulic shop press. I would say that there were no issues assembling this thing. So again, the idea that King either wrote or commissioned to have written these installation instructions was a great idea. I'd say assembly process on this would be, you know, 9.8, possibly 10 out of 10. It was not difficult in the slightest. There were a couple of small quibbles in terms of initial kind of build quality, but again, nothing related to how it functions, at least so far. We noted the slight gap in the pump mount. There is a little bit of an imperfection in this top plate, and then some of the issues with the screen not being perfectly straight and having a couple of sharp edges is the only thing really I could find. So I would say until I can actually use it and report on that, just from an initial quality and assembly point of view, I would say this thing is well worth the 300 and whatever bucks I paid for it. So good on you, King Canada. Talk to you later.